Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the dac1421, a 750 euro / 750 US dollar R2R digital to analog converter from Danish hi-fi company Soekris. This was loaned to me by Ryan Dietz at Modhouse Audio. Ryan sent this to me for review and for it to be part of this kind of large mid-fi DAC battle that I am working on. If you've been watching my channel, I've been doing a lot of DAC reviews in the, like, say, 500 to 1,000 US dollar range, and this falls right smack in the middle of that, so I will review this one today. Neither Ryan nor Modhouse nor Soekris has asked me or tried to influence my opinion on this piece at all in any way. As far as I know, I will not be keeping it any longer than is needed to do this review and the DAC roundup video that is coming at some point in the not distant future, and then it will be going back. So they have made no attempt to influence my opinion, so we'll dive into the review of the dac1421 here right after shameless self-promotion. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. Quick notes on the pricing and availability here. So this Soekris is a Danish company. On their website, everything is marked, prices are all marked in euros. And so this unit on their website is 750 euros, and it is labeled on their website as being in stock. Modhouse is the American distributor of the Soekris brand, and this unit, the 1421, is listed for 750 US dollars. But is labeled as out of stock, which it has been for a while. On the same day that I shot this video, so I don't have the answer yet, but I sent Ryan of Modhouse an email asking if he had any idea when this one would be back in stock here in the United States, and he hasn't replied yet. But again, I just sent that literally a few minutes ago, but it will be several days between me filming this and the public release. So when he replies, I will share that information that I get from him in a pinned comment down below. So check that out. Okay, so features and specs wise, again, this is a resistor ladder kind of DAC. It uses a resistor ladder to do the digital to analog conversion. There is a resistor ladder in there for each channel, if I am not mistaken. So this is then, if you've probably heard the term R2R. It is an R2R DAC. Soekris specifies that from its USB input, it can decode PCM files up to 24-bit 384 kilohertz sampling rates and DSD files up to DSD 256. From its SPDIF inputs, it can handle PCM files up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. All right, so let's do a quick unit tour here. All right, and we see a few things. We've got power button over here. We have LED indicator lights for the 4 different input options, which I'll show you on the back in a moment. And then we have LED indicator lights here for the different sampling rates to let you know what sampling rate that you have going on here. So there's a base number of 44 or 48, and then multipliers times 2, times 4, times 8, and then there's 1 for DSD here. If you're, say, playing a 96 kilohertz PCM file, then what will happen is the 48 kilohertz indicator will light up, and then the times 2, so 48 kilohertz times 2, 96 kilohertz, those 2 LEDs will be on. There is a little clipping indicator LED right here. We have these buttons here for crossfeed, and then there's an indicator for level of crossfeed here. And then there are 4 digital filters, and then the LED right here will indicate which digital filter you're on, and then see the owner's manual just for which color light means which filter type. We have a little alphanumeric display here, and then we have a volume knob. This actually does have preamp functionality in it. The standard like 2.1 volt output from single-ended outputs is volume level 0, 0 on here, and then you can back that down and there will be negative numbers, and you can also go up to +10 for a little bit, a tiny little bit of amplification at the output. But if you push it too hard, this clip thing will come on here. Then you can select the output from the line output on the back to this little 1/4-inch single-ended headphone output, which I really did not use much at all. I mean, it does work, it is functional, it's not spectacular, but it is rated for up to 140 milliwatt output at 300 ohms if that is of interest to you. But mostly I just use this as a DAC. Put the line out level at 0, 0, the standard 2.1 volt output, and then just let it go. All right, round back, we have a little bit different kind of power input connector than you're used to seeing. This is just a 2-prong style. I'll show you the power cord just in a moment. There is a power supply in here. It's not a particularly heavy unit. So, I mean, it's not does not have the beefiest power supply ever, but it also doesn't really need it in there either. But that's the power input. We have the USB input right here with a little switch. You can do like a legacy mode 1, old USB 1.0 protocol, flip it down for the more standard USB 2 protocol. Then we have 3 flavors of SPDIF digital audio input. We've got BNC coaxial, RCA coaxial, and Toastlink fiber optic. All right. And then here we have the 2 RCA stereo analog outputs right there. And so what you will observe here is that this unit is a single-ended unit. It has only single-ended RCA outputs. Okay? That makes it somewhat of a rarity of DACs at this price point here. You know, between $500 and $1,000 US. I mean, you've heard me complain about this a lot on this channel lately, is that so many of the DACs in that price range that exist these days are balanced and sound better from their balanced outputs than they sound from their single-ended outputs, and often quite noticeably so. So the fact that we have a dedicated single-ended output DAC here in this price range, I think is kind of a big deal. So when I got this in here, I was very hopeful that it would sound like on the level of some of its similarly priced competitors, like the Schiit Bifrost 2 or 2/64, like the Denafrips Aries. I just reviewed the 12th anniversary edition, you know, kind of on that level of performance. And I do have those DACs in-house with me at the moment to do comparisons with this in just a moment. So did it get there? We'll find out. And you know what? I'll actually just go ahead and tease that, yeah, it does. This is a really, really fine sounding DAC that I think is worth every bit of its asking price. And so let's unpack why all of that is. Now, the last bit of the build here, you do see we get this interesting aesthetic where we have this black faceplate. And this unit has been around. This has been a review unit that's gone to several, so it's got a couple of scuffs and visual little imperfections on the front panel here, which if you're going to buy one brand new, that won't be there, so don't worry. But then you have this, like, I think this is aluminum here, this kind of like light sea green color casing all the way around, which is just very, very Soekris, and it's just also kind of unique in its design there. So it stands out visually in how it is done too, particularly when you get past the back panel. But it also has a small footprint, so it's pretty desktop friendly in terms of where it goes, and then it's not very heavy. Okay, it doesn't have a huge power supply, but it doesn't need to draw a ton of power either. Seems like it is a pretty efficient electric circuit design on the inside. Here is that power cord that I mentioned. I mean, it's just a pretty standard AC power cord in pretty much every way, although it is a 2-prong instead of 3. And then I have a little knot in it, unfortunately. Okay, and then of course here is the end that goes into the DAC itself. Completely functional. Okay, nothing wrong with it and that sort of thing. So there it is. Shall we talk about sound? Yeah, let's get into sound. So let me start that by listing the test gear, which I often do. All right, so to source files into digital audio files into this thing, it spent the most time that I had with it using the RCA coax input connected to my Singer SU2 DDC, which was in turn connected to my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer now. Okay, and that is fed via Rune here, playing lossless either FLAC or DSD files, usually DSD converted to PCM for the coax input. Okay, FLAC files or DSD files, and then or streamed lossless FLAC from Qobuz. I did try briefly plugging the USB input here into the USB output of my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 using local files, both PCM and DSD, on my Surface Pro 4 laptop using Ottervana. Okay, and then I made sure that I downloaded the USB driver from Soekris' website for this unit to use there, which was an ASIO driver, so I could check BitPerfect and all of that sort of thing. Okay, downstream from this, amplifiers that this thing was plugged into would be the LTA MZ3, review pending, working on that. Vioelectric HPA V281, the single-ended input of, link in the description below for a review there. Lake People G111 Mark II, same, review down below. The Urzatich Perfidus, again, review down below. And let's see, were there any other amps in there? None are coming to mind right away, but those are 4 pretty decent amplifiers to be checking the DAC output of this with. And then I'm mostly a headphone listener. Sometimes the my Yamo C93 Mark II speakers were powered from the LTA MZ3, and I would listen with speakers there. But for critical listening and testing, I use mostly headphones. Hi-Fiman Susvara, Original Focal Utopia, Hi-Fiman HE1000 SE, Hi-Fiman HE1000 V2, because I just did a review for that one. But reviews for all of those in the link in the description below. But I also broke out my my DT880, my Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm for a little bit of brief testing with this too. Just to get, a more, let's call it realistically priced headphone in there to see how things are sounding. Okay, so with that, let's talk about the sound. So the perceived frequency response here is right in line with what most mid-fi DACs seem to be going for these days, and that is pretty close to a true neutral in terms of perceived frequency response. I mean, it's there's not a whole lot of emphasis really anywhere in the frequency range. Maybe just a little bit of upper mid-range emphasis on this one. Not a lot, but just maybe a slight perceived boost to sort of give it just a little bit of like perception of just a little bit added clarity to it. And so, like, again, it's pretty much neutral in there. Now, I think that it does have a fair amount of sub-bass presence and rumble with some decent slam and physicality in the low end that might be just a little bit above average, actually, for DACs in this price range. But we'll come back to that a little bit more in the comparisons here. Now, the presentation of it here, its sound staging is not huge, but it's not tiny. It is a little bit narrower than some of its competitors, like the Bifrost series, like the Ares series, like the Draco. Like, those are all kind of like really big sound stagers. This one is a little bit smaller than that, but not immensely so. Like, it's not a huge shrinking down of soundstage size here. However, within that soundstage, it is really impressively holographic with really impressive depth and layering. I mean, the imaging and the separation coming out of this thing are quite exquisite for the price point. So again, it's not huge and grand and epic. It's a little bit smaller, more reined in terms of its size, but within that, the spatial aspects, its ability to place things in all 3 dimensions and then like put space between things is like, it's right up there among the best, if not the best, for DACs in this price range, and I've been hearing a lot of them lately. Okay, The resolution here, oh, I should say that the sound staging though, like it's also a little bit farther away. A lot of its competitive DACs put sound a little bit closer to me, at least in some perceived distance from my ears to like where the first row of music starts basically. This one's just a little bit farther away than some of its competitors, but not like, not any kind of problematic way, at least to my ears. Okay, the resolution here is pretty good. It resolves right up there with the Aries, with the Bifrost, like all of that. Like it is quite a resolving thing with nice texturing. It brings out like the rosinousness, like the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings well. Room reverbs are nice and clear and articulate, and like you also get that really good sense of space, like where the reflection is coming from. And all of that sort of thing. So that's right there where it needs to be, and so forth. So and then the timbre is not like necessarily class leading, but it is far, far from poor. For the most part, voices are sounding like voices, pianos like pianos, drums like drums, guitars like guitars, and so on and so forth. Just maybe not quite to the level of organicness or naturalness that I have heard from, say, like the Schiit house sound or something like that. Like, so, and I am saying the company name Schiit space house sound on that, okay? Okay, but again, pretty strong and right up there where it needs to be with its competition, I think, okay? And so, I mean, I have enjoyed listening to it. It has impressed me quite a bit here. If anything, like its presentation here is maybe just a little bit more forward and aggressive overall. Like I mentioned that slight bump in the upper mids. I think that kind of brings on this sense, like it will add perceptive levels of clarity. But it also gives everything, like, I don't want to call it etched and I don't want to call it analytical. Some are going to say that it leans that way. To my mind, it's still more smooth than it isn't. But it does just kind of put a little bit more like clearly defined edge and boundary to a lot of the sounds in its presentation. So it's kind of leaning in that analytical direction. Now that stands in contrast with a lot of R2R like models and sound out there, which like R2R DACs kind of have this reputation for just being like this velvety smooth kind of presentation. And this one sounds a little bit more stereotypically Delta Sigma, okay, meaning chip-based DAC in its approach there. Again, for me, not to any kind of level that gets objectionable or fatiguing. It just is. Like, it's just the nature of its sound is it's just a little bit more like that than some other R2R models. Okay, so I'll also drop in here a general comment that we probably, like as a hobby, should be getting away from the tendency of labeling Delta Sigma DACs as like the analytical clinical ones, and R2Rs as like the, you know, smooth laid back buttery ones. Because you will find examples of an R2R being, you know, a little bit more towards the analytical sound. Okay, and then there are other examples out there of like chip-based, even ESS chip-based DACs just being really, really smooth. Okay, so I just want to caution us all on that as just kind of a little side note there. So let me get to some comparisons here with some of its competition, and then I will come back and talk about where this thing stacks up as a value on its own. Oh, I forgot real quick, the Crossfeed and the filter. So the Crossfeed, if you're not familiar with what that does, is it will take some of the signal from one channel and bleed just a small percentage of it into the other channel from like left to right or vice versa. And particularly with old music, like early days of stereo, when they did weird things like hard pan all the vocals to one side and all the instruments to the other side, like in situations like that, Crossfeed can be helpful and like remove some of that uncomfortable pressure on your ears if you're a headphone user, and help with some of like the accuracy of the stereo image and all of that kind of thing. I really didn't use the Crossfeed on this much. I don't really use Crossfeed much ever because I think it often sacrifices bass output, and that's just not a sacrifice I am willing to make. Okay, but that's here if that is of interest to you. And then the digital filter buttons did not make huge impacts here. You heard me talk about how this one just sounds a little bit like more analytical leaning than like most R2R DAC sound, and just like a little bit more analytical in general in its presentation. The digital filters here mostly just change the level at which that analytical nature comes out, at least to my ear. So it's kind of like just adjusting where this thing lands on kind of like the wet-dry spectrum. How blended together versus how like separated and discrete are the sounds in the presentation is like what those digital filters did to me. Very subtly so, but it did happen a little bit. And I prefer just the soft, I have it written down here, the soft Butterworth filter, which is like kind of the default with the LED off here, is the one that I liked the best. Okay, now those comparisons. Let's get to those. So I pulled out a few DACs here. I got out the Geshelli J2S DAC here with the Sparkos op amp upgrades. I did a first impressions video of this recently, which I will link to in the description down below. And the configuration that you see right here is just shy of $600 US. That was one comparison that I did. I got out my Schiit Bifrost 2/64, and I still have around, because Alvin Chi said that I could keep it through the comparison video, the Denafrips Aries 12th Anniversary Edition right here. So this one is like basically $1,000 US. The Bifrost is now $800 US, and again, I just told you this configuration of the J2S is just shy of $600 US. So 3 quick points of comparison here. Let's start with the Geshelli. The Geshelli here like did not have like the depth accuracy in the spatial presentation. It's a little bit more robust sounding. It sounds a little bit fuller and richer in its sound than the Soekris does. Okay, I think it hits a little bit harder in the bass. It just has a generally like more fleshed out, more tonally rich kind of sound to it. It is not quite as resolving as the Soekris. It is not quite as overall holographic as the Soekris either. And it also sounds like, again, I mentioned how the Soekris has that perceived greater distance from head position to where the music starts. The Geshelli brings that music a little bit closer to you, for better or worse, okay, in my opinion there. Okay, but I think overall, the Soekris is the better sonic package than the J2S, but just a tiny little bit. It is not a big gap, just a tiny little bit, okay? So that's one comparison. These two, okay, right here. I'm gonna say, like, make the claim here, like these three, put all three of them in the frame here. This is a case where you're not talking about better or worse, you're just talking about different, okay? I think these three are really all on basically an equal technical and perceived sound quality level. They just have slightly different presentations to their sounds and slightly different feature sets that are going to make one of them more attractive to particular end users over the other two. So let's unpack that a little bit here. The Bifrost here actually sounds more similar to the J2S than it does the Soekris. So again, a little bit more tonal richness and tonal density here as compared to the Soekris. Okay, a little bit more physicality and dynamic impact as compared to the Soekris. Okay, but it also has a little bit more, like, it's not quite as strong in the depth dimension. It's not quite as holographic laterally in its spatial presentation, but it has just that generally like fuller, richer sound that is a little bit closer in its positioning. Again, that head to first line of sound kind of distance in there. Resolution-wise, I think it's basically a dead heat. I don't know that there are really meaningful differences in resolution between these two. Feature set-wise, The Bifrost has a very stripped down feature set. It has 3 inputs. It has USB, coax, and Toast-Link fiber optic. It is balanced. It has balanced outputs and single-ended outputs on it. One of the primary advantages that the Bifrost series has over the 3 that I just showed you is that it sounds pretty good from both single-ended and balanced outputs. It is not quite as strong as itself single-ended compared to balanced, okay? Balanced being the better. The balanced output here does not sound as good as the Soekris does. Okay, so if you're going single-ended to single-ended, the Soekris easily outperforms the Bifrost 2 here. But comparing balanced output to this, okay, they are basically equals, again, just with slightly different presentations. So again, smoother, not quite as analytical or clinical kind of presentation here. Still very dynamic, and I like Schiit's interpretation of timbre. The voices sound more organic and natural. Instruments sound more organic and natural to me from the Bifrost than the Soekris does. Not a big gap. And again, I don't want to say that the single-ended output versus single-ended output, that the Soekris runs circles around the single-ended output of the Bifrost. It doesn't. It's just that the Soekris is noticeably superior sounding from its output than the single-ended output of the Bifrost 2. Okay, and this is the /6.4 version. Okay, the Aries. This is the 12th anniversary edition. I mentioned in the review of this video, I held up the Soekris because I had listened to the Soekris a little bit at that point, definitely a lot more now, that I was struck by how similar these two sound actually anymore, which is really more of a change for the Aries over its previous models than the Soekris has changed. The 1421 has changed from previous iterations from the Soekris line as well. So the Aries moved from being very warm sounding in the Aries 2 to being much more neutral in the 12th anniversary edition here. And so because of that, and because they're both R2R, like their profiles, at least in terms of a perceived frequency response, are just very similar right now. And other than the size of the sound stage on these things, with the Aries being noticeably larger in stage than the Soekris is, I worked pretty hard to find any other meaningful differences between these two. I did find them eventually. The Soekris is a little bit fuller and more impactful in the true deep sub bass. It also, I think, is a little bit more exacting and holographic in its spatial presentation, at least in terms of placing things and then placing sound between images, like imaging and separation. The Aries 12th is a bigger sounding device. Like it is like a much bigger sound stager and that sort of thing. Maybe not quite as overall dynamic. The Soekris, again, still has that slightly more analytical / clinical kind of presentation to it, where the Aries is just very laid back and smooth. Which one is more resolving? Again, dead heat. I don't know that one of these is meaningfully more resolving than the other. They have a very, very similar like sound signature from a frequency response standpoint. They have slightly different approaches to how big their sound stages are, and then how they place things and all that. They have slightly different approaches in terms of like how aggressive versus laid back they are. Okay. But they are essentially, after that, dead heats on timbre and resolution. So it's just really going to be, from a sound standpoint, okay, what do you need? Now, the Denafrips here has a couple of input options that the Soekris does not. At least it has the I2S input option. The Soekris does not. It also will decode much higher sampling rates, and if you saw my review on this, the USB connection using HQ player and upsampling PCM files up to 1536 kilohertz sounded utterly jaw-droppingly amazing on the Aries 12th edition, whereas this one's going to top out at 384. I don't know if using HQ Player would be beneficial at all for this piece right here. The Denafrips, however, really needs to be used from its balanced output. Its single-ended output is not terrible, but it's definitely just kind of okay? Whereas if you need a single-ended connection, you're using a tube amp or something of that nature, the Soekris is going to pull way ahead of the Denafrips on there. Again, this is basically the sonic equal of the Aries 12th from its single-ended output to the Aries 12th in its balanced output. They just have slight presentation and features differences, okay, from there. So again, these two and this one, sonic equals, okay, just slightly different presentations to them and different feature sets, okay. So we'll leave it there for now, and I will do a more thorough DAC battle with more models here in the near future. I need to finish the review of the Geshelli, and I'm fingers crossed really hoping that I get a Mojo 2 in here soon. I've got a line on one, hopefully. Okay, so then after those comparisons, let's come back and talk about the dac1421. Does it sound as good as it needs to for the price? Absolutely, okay? It is right there, comfortably at home in the $500 to $1,000 price range, up there even with the Bifrost 2/64 with the Aries 12th Anniversary Edition, okay, in terms of its overall performance, right there where it needs to be. Its true advantage in there is that it is a single-ended device. So I thought it sounded pretty good attached to the Erzatich Perfidus amplifier. And that's important because the Erzatich Perfidus amplifier is single-ended only. But if you're also a user of, say, the Bottlehead Crack, or the K&H-A1A Mark II, or the Felix Echo, or the Hagerman Tuba, okay? I'm naming tube amps here, okay? The Schiit Lyre Plus, okay? Like, those are all single-ended only amplifiers, and so many DACs out there are balanced and sound better from their balanced outputs than from their single-ended outputs. This is one of the very few models out there that can step in and fill that void right now, okay, of sounding really quite spectacular from a single-ended output. So that is like its biggest selling point right now, in my opinion. Now, I wish that there were more single-ended options out there. There are not right now. Again, the Chord Mojo 2 is about the only other one that I can think of right off the moment that I can just pull out and say, I know that that is a single-ended DAC at roughly this price point. And again, hopefully I will get one of those in here soon. Okay, now, even if you have a balanced DAC or a balanced amp, if you like the description I gave of the sound of this thing, feel free to use this, because it's perfectly fine to use a balanced DAC or balanced amp from its single-ended input. That's not going to hurt anything, okay? And so this is still right up there with the Bifrost, with the Aries series, all that in terms of overall performance, that you can consider that in that situation too if you like something that is a little bit more analytical but still has some smoothness to it, that is neutral but is just like exacting in its spatial presentation. Like, for example, if you still have one of the older Violectric V200 series amps around, those can be a little bit sloppy in how they handle their spatial stuff. They match really, really well with the Soekris house sound because of how exacting the Soekrises are in their spatial presentation. So that's another example of why you might be interested in this DAC. But I like it. I think it's excellent. I am really relieved that it's single-ended and as good as it is, because I think the market really, really needs this product as a because of that. So well done, Soekris. You've really hit a home run with this one. So those are my thoughts on the Soekris dac1421. Thanks for watching. Please remember to comment down below, like this video if you have not, subscribe to the channel if you have not yet, check out my PayPal, check out my Patreon, you know, generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.